Hello and welcome to the Pieces in Action Verb podcast. I'm here with Lauren Pass Erickson, who is a good friend of mine from way back in the day. It feels like yesterday and also, I don't know, a really long time ago where we met in circus class. And Lauren, at that point in time, I think you were 1 or 2 years out of college, living in San Francisco with some friends, and so you and I met hanging upside down on a rope. And from there, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have such great memories of that time at the Circus Arts Center. And it's so nice to get to loop back around with you all these years later. Um, so yeah, these days I am a somatic and dance movement therapist, and I have a private practice in Boulder, Colorado. And I work with folks individually and in groups on embodiment and trauma recovery, developing sense of self and sexuality and self-expression, and all the ways that that shows up in our work and relationships and how we want to live lives that are fulfilling. I've also trained as a dance meditation facilitator, and so I do group dance meditation sessions, which I also really love. And so that's kind of the other part of my work that I do partly on the side, but then also get to weave into the therapy that I offer.
Wow, that's a lot, and I'm gonna try to not be like the proud like older sister figure here, but I am really proud of you, because I remember.
Oh,
I mean, like you're so well, we're all grown up. Like I just turned 50 and I feel like I'm almost grown up, right? Like, but you're so evolved and developed from that place that I knew you back then, and yet I can see in you dance has been like, so okay, here's this piece for Bliss, and even when I knew you back then, dance was a big part of your life then too. Can you tell us a
yeah.
little bit about your journey with dance?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a dancer from just dancing around my house and in my bedroom and with my family. And there was always just a lot of music playing in my household. And so that always just felt very natural for me. And then I was also in dance classes and dance training from like, itty bitty kiddo days all the way through high school and college. I did tap and jazz and ballroom and some African styles. And then I got into aerial arts later, which was how you and I met. And so I'd always just really loved dance and gravitated towards it and really did um, any style that I could get my hands on. And and then of course there's just the element of being at like concerts and festivals and things that people might consider more like ecstatic dance, although I didn't really know what that was at the
Hmm.
time. But I always just really loved spaces where I could have my own experience with music. And over time I kind of leaned more and more in that direction. And then at a certain point in my life, which was after I left San Francisco and I had traveled for a while and I had been doing some teaching work and things, and was that kind of a big pivot point where I wanted to do something different and I wasn't quite sure what yet. And when I was traveling, I ended up finding this dance studio and yoga studio in Chiang Mai, Thailand,
Hmm.
where they had the School of Moving Meditation, which is where I learned the dance mandala dance meditation practice, which is what I also teach now. And when I found that, it like so many things clicked together for me because it was that free form, ecstatic dance kind of experience where I got to just move my body with people and with music in any way that I wanted and in a way that felt really profound. And it also brought in this kind of mindful and sacred and spiritual aspect to dance that I think I had been aware of and also craving for a really long time. Like I sort of felt that I had
Mm-hmm.
been searching for that in a lot of other spaces where it wasn't really there. And I didn't really realize that's what I had been searching for in dance until I found this more meditative type of practice. And then it was like, oh, okay, there's so much more here than just when I'm having a lot of fun, at a party or in a dance class or in performance or something like that. It was just a really different experience. So
Can I,
that hooked me in.
sorry
Yeah,
to
go
interrupt,
ahead.
can I pause you there?
Yeah,
Because I am
yeah,
hearing verbs I want to bring out. So,
yeah,
um, delve, you've been delving in dance your whole life. It is something
yeah,
you are delving in. And so, like you just talked about, you've learned various different schools of dance that are based on a formula that you're taught. So you're taught how to move your body in a certain way with tap. There's certain rhythms and genre of music that comes in with that. There's different for ballroom, and there's these different. So you talked about African dance. I can't remember all the ones that you touched on, but these are all schools so that you're trained. There's certain patterns, there's certain rhythms, there's certain steps, and when you're performing a choreography, you've memorized someone else's concept of movement. Am I right about that in a sense?
yeah, yeah,
And so you're really, and then there's music on in the house, you're dancing in your bedroom, and yet there's this sense of seeking, you're seeking something. And so many years into your seeking, you find you're in Chiang Mai, you're like maybe what, 25 at this point in time ish, somewhere around there.
yeah. Probably like 26, 27 at that
Okay,
point.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So you find your way to a type of movement. You mentioned ecstatic dance. Not everybody will have actually experienced that. Before we move on into the next
yeah.
part of this concept, can you just tell us a little bit about what ecstatic dance is in terms of the experience of it?
Yeah, sure. So if you're not familiar, a static dance is a style of dance event where the intention is to really drop into your body and have a really free experience moving your body with people and with music. And these are often sober events. And they're often events where talking is not allowed inside the dance floor. So if you want
Oh,
to converse
wow.
or socialize, you
Okay.
exit. So um, often there's really great DJs at
Yeah.
ecstatic dances, in my experience.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit more contained than if you were like going to a show. So people aren't
Okay.
really there to see like a specific artist, although they might certainly enjoy, particular artists that show up. But it's a little bit more contained in how you show up. Often there's a bit more of like an intention setting circle in the beginning. There's usually
Hmm.
some kind of like closing or sharing at the end. So it's kind of held in a different way so that people can really drop into their bodies and into the music a little bit more thoroughly than if you're at a different type of event. They're often very fun. There's often a little bit of kind of a celebration vibe to them. People who might also practice like contact improv or styles like that are more like not quite partner dancing but more interactive. Sometimes that will be incorporated, so there's like a kind of a social element as well if people are up for that.
So
Yeah,
so it sounds like back to the list here, finding and holding healthy boundaries. So there's a certain sense of, it's not just free for all at these events. It's, you mentioned sobriety, so there's not alcohol or drugs invited in. There's an
mm-hmm.
intention setting. It sounds like so there's no talking, but people can dance by themselves or they can dance together, and a
Yes,
closing. So there's a container that's built into the process. So that's getting you maybe a step closer to what you're seeking, that source within that's drawing you forward, and you're experimenting with
right.
different venues and events, and so then you find yourself in Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai, uh, being Thailand is a very spiritual country, and there's a Buddhism is the main religion there, although there's also animism in terms of their historical beliefs and traditions. And so here you are in Chiang Mai, and I think what is now a pretty vibrant expat community building
Yeah.
up there. And so how does that set the stage for this meditation practice that you found?
Yeah, well, it was very serendipitous for me because, as I said, this was kind of a pivotal point where I was intentionally taking some time to do some self-exploration, and I wasn't totally happy on the trajectory that I had been on in terms of like my work and things like that, and really wanted to kind of reground and reorient and get back to some things that I really valued that had sort of felt missing. And so when I was in Chiang Mai, I was doing a whole ton of journaling and just exploring the city and going to kind of different events and stuff. And I was so naturally drawn to say, okay, where can I dance? Right, this is what I need
Sure.
right now. And I hadn't really been dancing in a while. And that was one of those things I had kind of gotten away from in the past like year or so. And I was like, well, that's not a good sign. And so
Right.
I was just looking for places to dance. And so I ended up finding, like I said, this studio that did these dance sessions and just kind of showed up. And the first one was like okay, and I was like, okay, that was fun, you know. But I think it was actually like the second time that I went back, and I don't remember exactly like what was happening with me that day, but I think I was having kind of a more intense, just emotional experience. And that time when I went to that particular session, it just really opened up a lot for me, and just felt so reconnected to my body, and just the energy was just moving in such a different way inside of me. And at that point I was like, all right, like this is, I'm doing this. And I literally like canceled like 6 weeks worth of travel plans. I was supposed to go like all over and do other things,
Wow.
um and I was like, nope, nope, I'm staying here. And I did. And I stayed there for about a month, and did a whole bunch of things with that studio and that teacher. And um, really just danced as much as I could, and used that as my main process of really coming back to myself and clarifying how I was feeling and what I wanted and what my values were, and what direction I wanted to go in next. And it was somewhere around that same time that I started hearing about dance therapy as a mental health field. And
Wow.
so
Okay.
that felt
Yeah.
like a very natural transition into, okay, here's another way to deepen into this kind of work.
So, you know how it is when you can meet someone at different points in their life, and whether they're a youngster or, you know, a granny, you still get a sense of their essence. So I have the sense of your essence as being a good listener, and also being someone who has a deep kindness and a depth to character. And so I'm not at all surprised that you are a therapist, and I'm not at all surprised that you're a dance therapist. And can you tell me a little bit more about your awareness of, well, actually, I guess my brain wants to go in two different directions, so I'm going to say one and then the other, but then we'll circle back. I want to hear more
Okay.
about what somatic means to you, and what trauma healing means in an embodied way. So let's talk about that second. But first, let's
Okay.
talk about the spiritual connection
Mm.
through the body. And so you're talking about a mandala, which I associate with a meditative, like either that you're looking at an image, maybe it's a sand painting, maybe it's on the ground and it's been created by a monk who's meditating over the maze. It's a maze, right? And so we're either looking at it and delving into it, or we're walking a maze. And so this concept of mandala to me is like a internal exploration that's done with a physical process, either looking or actually walking through. So what is a dance mandala? How does that work, and how do you connect your body to your spirit through that process?
Yeah, well, first to just speak to the mandala piece, I think this particular dance practice has that same quality of like entering into a spiralic structure. And there is, although it's very free form and you can, you know, you can be in it in any way that you want, there is a structure to the arc of the session, and the music that's chosen is actually very specific, and the words that are chosen are very specific to lead you through different stages of this meditation. And while there's not like a particular music set or like a script or anything like that, there is a very specific structure that the facilitator will go through.
So you have
And
that in mind as a facilitator before you go into a session. You have a maybe not the same,
Yes.
the words aren't picked out, but you have the steps that you're going to move your group through.
Right. So when I went back and did the facilitators training with this teacher in this practice, um, that was a 6-week training. And part of what we did, among other things, was learn that structure and get really familiar with how that goes and feel it in our bodies so that we can go through it um, in an intuitive and memorized sort of way so that we know kind of what's going to happen and then we can also respond in the moment of how we want to lead people through
And
that.
and somehow it seems like all of your years of training as a dancer, intuitive and memorized, those two things together, right? So you have something
Yeah.
memorized, but then it's an intuitive, in the moment kind of an experience.
Yeah, and that's one way that my dance training served me really well, is in just things like body awareness and spatial awareness and balance and just being able to use my body um, in movement in a way that feels very fluid because of that training. And so in some ways there's like some structure that you have to break down and like get away from when you're kind of more focused on performance. And at the same time there's a lot of that like body awareness and proprioception and things like that that I think served me very well as I came into um, this kind of experience instead. Um, but I've tangented, so let me come back. Where was I? So the mandala, though, when I think of that in terms of this practice, I really think of the circular or spiral quality of it, where as you go through the layers, um, a lot of the layers will kind of harken back to earlier ones and they show up in a different way, but there's different links that you can draw between them so that you're in some ways you're doing this from start to finish, but actually you're doing this kind of spiral
And how
you're in.
that pattern is basically, you could describe life that way, right? Like, isn't life a spiral as
Yes.
well? And
Yes.
being trained in any experience that brings us into that awareness is a helpful experience, I would think.
Yeah, yeah. And then, to speak to that spiritual piece, I think just when you're present and you're embodied and you're accessing things like sensation and intuition and following movement impulses and things like that, the spiritual connection to me feels quite like a natural flow from that. I don't think that there's a lot of like extra layers that need to be added to then start to connect that to um, either an insight oriented experience or a transpersonal experience of some kind. And that will be really unique to each person, just like each dance will be really unique to each person. But I think to me, that's a natural outflow of being present in your body and really listening to what's happening in your experience and following movement that comes out of that. And then especially when you add in, like you mentioned, the boundaries and the container and the support of the practice, I feel like that is kind of what then flows from that structure.
And so I think that's actually a great segue back into my second question to you, which was, what does somatics mean? What is somatics?
Yeah. Yeah. So somatic technically just means body centered, right? Soma is the word for body. Somatic is the adjective like of the body in some way. And when I use the word somatic, I'm often referring to something that is based in uh, body movement or body sensation or the body experience, right? So when I talk about somatic therapy, I'm talking about therapy where the foundation of it is the experience in the body, and we're starting with what's happening there, and we're working with things primarily on the body level. So that's how I use that word.
And so, just going to take a moment and check in with my piece verbs. And excuse me for the frog in my throat this morning here.
Oh, no problem.
So, I was watching you and your newlywed husband at the time, so I think he was, and maybe he still is, you can tell me, playing video games as an income stream. And so here I was, like, I was, employed by the state of California, like, had like my pretty narrow blinders on how one builds one's career. And I was just so, like, you guys opened my mind in so many ways. I was like fascinated that he could earn his income that way. I knew there was some kind of a Burning Man
We
connection
all
going
were.
on. Yeah, right. I knew that you all had been influenced by Burning Man, which was this kind of like mind expanding concept to me. And then off you went to Thailand, and I think there was also Bali. I can't remember where you were in Southeast Asia completely, but um,
Yeah.
to to allow for play and exploration and travel. And so, um, is there anything else you'd like to say about the verb play? I just noticed that that's important to you and something that you bring into your life.
Yeah. And oh gosh, I'm actually going to kind of like connect this into your trauma related question because
Oh, good.
like
Yeah.
this actually feels relevant on a few
Yeah.
levels. So bear with me while I try to maybe like draw these lines of connection in my head. Um, So when we think about embodiment, and we can kind of merge that a little bit with like the word somatic, like this idea of being in your body and being connected to your body sensations and also your body impulses and desires and what you're drawn to, right?
Hmm.
There's a natural orientation around pleasure and things that feel good. Like the body wants to feel good. The body will kind of naturally go towards um, good tastes and good smells and good feelings on the skin, and I'm going to put like playful experiences in that category of like to be just enjoying yourself in the world, right? And not in a way that's like productive, right? But just this
Right.
childlike sense of enjoyment. um, which I think you also have to be really present for. There's a quality of mindfulness or presence or like really being in the moment when you get curious or you get excited about something or you have this impulse to explore or do something silly, right? And so that also feels connected because you really have to be present to be embodied. You can only experience your body in the present moment. So that feels like a link there. Um, and that's also a very nourishing part of our nervous system.
Hmm.
Play comes out of being relaxed and safe and having our needs met. And it's really the opposite part of our nervous system compared to when we're in like a fight or flight mode, or when we're stressed, or when we're threatened, or something, or we're not getting our needs met, or something's going on that's not safe, right? We're going
Hmm.
to be activated in a different way
Hmm.
compared to when we're nourished and we're safe and we're around people that we like. And then we start to access things like play that becomes available to us when we're in that nervous system state. So not only is this a way of really enjoying our just lived experience in our body, but it's actually indicating kind of a sense of health and safety in that moment.
Hmm.
It can also be a healing experience for that in that way where it can be a way to access that feeling of being safe and present, right? Um, and that's really one of the things that we're doing in trauma work, and in somatic trauma work in particular, is we're looking at experiences that have caused us to become tense or disconnected or afraid or having a fight or flight response in our
Hmm.
bodies
Hmm.
that often takes us out of our bodies quite thoroughly.
Hmm.
And then there's this process of slowly coming back to sensation, coming back to move through things that maybe got tight or trapped or stuck or blocked because of some really dangerous experiences. Um, and then part of that healing process is slowly coming back also to things like pleasure and play and positive experiences that can be accessed through the body, but that get cut off often in that process. So that is my
Gosh,
very
so much.
long leaving answer to to the
Yeah.
play verb. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I have to pause for a moment. And pause, thankfully, is actually on your list of verbs here that you gave
Yeah.
me. So I'm going to pause for a moment and just take this in. My sense of you is that you are a pioneer. And so I'm just actually also noticing that in our English language, we were talking about play, pleasure, positivity, pause, pioneer. There's a lot of P's in there, and I don't know why, but I'm just noticing. That you're a pioneer of wellness is how I would look at you, and how in a world that is dealing with intergenerational compacted trauma,
Mm.
you know, centuries upon centuries of trauma that, and looking at that also that other piece word of balance. If we've got two different parts of our nervous system, and you know you're a professional, you're trained, you can even speak to and explain to us how this works. There's two different parts of our nervous system, and one of them helps, and they're all working together to help us be well. And the nervous system is also our it's a it's how we sense the world in so many ways, right? Our sense of touch, our sense of smell, all of our senses come through our nervous
Hmm.
system, as well as our thoughts and our reactions, our ability to move. And so we have the nervous system that takes care of us in a moment of danger, right? And so we're moving fast, we're tense, we're ready to go. And then there's the nervous system that takes care of us in those moments of safety where we can maybe sleep, we can experience joy, we can feel calm, we can find that place of peace, right? What this podcast is
Hmm.
about, peace. So I see you as a pioneer out of that world of compacted trauma into the innate knowingness, this space of innate knowingness that we all inherently have, that is our space of wellness, and that space is inside of our physical being, as well as some kind of energetic quality that we experience. And so I do actually want to express gratitude to you for being you,
Oh.
and for being the pioneer that you are, because you know, to move out of that collective place of trauma into that place of wellness is actually an act of incredible courage. And so I
Mm.
don't know if you have you know, you have hit that fear wall, and just busted right through it, or how that has been for you, to carve out this path of your life, and in the way that you're living it yourself, but also then also holding space for other people professionally. Um, and I don't know where that takes us conversation wise, but looking at the list of verbs, it could take us in lots of places. Learning with your heart, learning with your mind, persisting, moving, working, seeking, sharing. So many verbs here, Lauren. I'm kind of overwhelmed with the number of verbs that I have on the list here for you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but maybe we can talk about, you know, there's got to have been a conscious decision at some point to go from your internal embodied experience of your own life to getting your degree and your certification as a therapist and moving into holding space for other people. So,
Mm.
what was that like, that transition from private Lauren to public holding space Lauren? I mean, it sounds like this mandala training, the mandala meditation, dance meditation, has something to do with it.
It does, I think, I mean, on one level, I love people. I've always loved people, and when my previous work that was in like education and teaching and things like that, that was what I loved about it. Was I loved my students. I loved working with people. There was a lot of other stuff that I ended up not being a good fit for me in terms of working in classrooms and schools and stuff was kind of like something I didn't want to continue with. But I loved my students, I loved the relationships that were there. And so that was a natural kind of value that I think I already had. And when I was reflecting on what I wanted to do in my next phase of training or life or whatever, um, that seemed like already an important piece that I wanted to include, as I knew that I liked humans
Okay.
and that I really valued those relationships. And so in some ways
Yeah.
going in the counseling and the therapy direction was kind of a natural progression of um, getting to still work with people and getting to focus that work on people and their experiences rather than on like academics or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and then the dance meditation training, and when I started leading those, that definitely was an inspiration as well, because I really loved it, first of all, but I also really saw how, you know, people would have really deep experiences in these sessions, and there was a lot that would come up. There was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of processing, there was just some really profound experiences that people would have. And um, we were, as a community, very supportive of each other, and there was always time spent after dances just eating and talking. And, you
Hmm.
know, I think people were really held in those experiences when they were really tender or were in a big process. But I saw that happening, and I wanted to be able to go there with people. I kind of felt the limitations of just my knowledge and my training in terms of
Hmm.
people and trauma and psychology and all of that. And so I felt pulled in by seeing what would come up for folks in this practice, and I wanted to be able to deepen into that and to hold that and to really honor those experiences more thoroughly.
And
And
so in
so
the
then, yeah, the mental health piece and like the sort of more formal like therapy piece of it again felt like a natural progression, because I was like, just I was like, I can see that there's more here. Like there's more here, and I want to go there. I want to be able to go there with people, and in a responsible way. And I want my scope of practice to actually include that, rather than something that maybe I like don't quite know how to handle, or I'm not sure how to step into that with them.
so you're expanding yourself. So you're in the finding and following your own path. You are seeking, you are going within, you are also going outward because you're looking at, you love people, you want to connect with people, you're noticing, you're trying out teaching. Well, I like the people, but I don't necessarily like the structure of it, or the academic focus isn't really where my energy is meant to be. So where is my energy meant to be? It's meant to be in helping people. Oh, now I have to expand myself to be a more, you said the word responsible, a responsible container for going to that place with them and to getting training. And so that led you back to the United States, and then you were looking at different programs, and you ended up at, is it Naropa Institute, I think, right, in Boulder?
Yes. Yeah. I That was how I ended up in Boulder. I came here for Naropa's they have a large graduate school of counseling with a lot of different very unique programs. And yeah, I ended up going into the somatic and dance therapy program there.
And so it strikes me as interesting in life in general, and this is a good example, how it is important to find one's own path, and yet our paths inform the paths of other people. So there's got to have been that first 1, 2, 5, 10 dance therapists, the people that noticed the connection between the trauma memory and the movement of the muscle or the sinew, or the way that memories are actually stored in the body. Someone noticed that, and then someone delved, and then someone studied, and more people came. It's almost like, that first raindrop that formed the Grand Canyon. There was the first one, but then there were others, and the balance between going your own way and yet requiring the support of other human beings to go one's own way, and how somehow there's a balance there, and it fascinates me.
One thing that's important, I think, is that, you know, in dance therapy and in the dance therapy field, people will often talk about the pioneers or the founders of dance therapy, which
Mm-hmm.
were mostly white American women who were modern dancers in the early to mid 20th century. And
Hmm.
a number of them kind of also got into more psychological work and ended up kind of weaving together dance and their modern dance training with things that were happening in mental health at the time. And so that's often what is like talked about as the beginning of the dance therapy field. And, you know, to use your water metaphor of like, here's the drop that turns into something bigger. Um, but then there's also like the water cycle, right? And it's like that's only one drop actually of like all of this water that's been flowing around since the beginning of time. And one thing that I appreciate about the perspective that was included at Naropa was also acknowledging that like this is not new, right? Indigenous cultures have been using dance and embodiment as healing work since the beginning of time, right? And
So important.
mindfulness and a
Yeah.
lot of these meditation practices, right? We can talk about like Buddhist practices and like all of these Asian meditation practices and things that get appropriated, and like that's been going on for ages, right? And so I think that's an important framework to bring in as well, is to really honor how this shows up in different cultures and across time, and in like shamanism and in all sorts of religious and spiritual and healing practices across the globe and across time. And so really honoring that when we talk about like dance therapy, which is sort of like this Western version that has evolved in a very particular context, but certainly does not have, you know, a trademark on embodiment, right? Like
Sure.
this is a, you know, this is something that is really pervasive in a lot of traditions that go way, way further back than, you know, 20th century modern dance. So that's also maybe a little bit of tangent from what you were asking, but that also feels like important context to bring in when we're talking about some of these words that have like somatics and embodiment and things like that that have become a little bit like popular, even like I hear those words kind of all over the place now, and people are using them in a lot of different ways. And there's like this kind of freshness and newness to it in our Western cultural experience. And it's actually completely not new at all.
And so there's something really, so I, so what I notice is when conversation goes in the direction of, or you and I haven't taken it there, but it could go in the direction of current politics, and I don't mean politics like you know, parties that get elected, but the politics of being human, and
Yeah.
the awareness that we have at this point in time, you know, your culture, my culture, of having been a very destructive force, and also having a sense of I guess the word pioneer is actually very, very relevant to this conversation, because there's been a lot of European pioneers that say they were the first to climb a particular mountain or the first to be on a particular
Yeah,
riverbank, when of
it's
course
a kind of
they
a
weren't.
complex word for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so somehow to not go there into that space of deep pain and anger and hurt, but to actually hold this recognition as I'm going to use the water drop again, a drop in the bucket towards healing, a drop in
Yeah.
the bucket towards reconciliation, a drop in the bucket towards apology, towards reparation, and all of those comes back to the body, to that. So if you're taking your nervous system from the fight and flight, which is where I think a lot of those conversations happen, in that space of power over, power under, right or wrong, you know, the intense polarities, to bring it back into the body, into that deeply sacred, tender place, the deeply sacred, tender, well, safe, universally connected to the whole place. And so it sounds to me like Naropa gave you, there was an honoring that was happening, is what I'm hearing you say. There was an honoring that was happening of the universality of these experiences, and also just a recognition that in the school of Western American psychology, and how that developed and is continuing to develop, there were people that had the aha moment of like, oh, my body and my mind and my well-being is all connected. That could have been a relatively recent experience in our cultural phenomena, in our cultural. It's really, I feel like it's a river that's flowing, and in our river that's flowing, and yet to
Mm-hmm.
realize that there's, you brought it back to the water cycle, there's a sea, and there's groundwater, and there's waves, and there's clouds, and it's this continual spiral of life. And so that connection
Yeah.
of body, mind, spirit, emotion is about being alive.
Yeah. 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 I really love everything that you just said. It's so beautifully articulated. And to go back to like some peace verbs that I heard in there too, one that stood out to me is honoring.
Yeah.
That's what feels important to me around naming these sorts of things is
Naming.
this process of really honoring um, history and scope and humans and this kind of larger process that we're in. And I do think that has a healing quality to it. And when we're able to do that in a way that is present and tender and embodied and coming from a place of real like reverence for all of these things, it has that was the other word that's standing out to me, was like the healing piece, right? So even if we look at our kind of like Western culture that got very body mind split, and now we're finding our way back, right? I do think that's a collective healing process that's happening. The more that we can come back to this connection, the more we're also coming back to connection with each other. We're coming back into connection with the earth and the environment and the relationships there. We're coming back into connection with different groups of people that we've been sort of severed from over historical periods of time, right? And so it does feel really vital to this weaving of a peaceful experience where all of this gets to be felt and honored and tended to in a really honest and authentic way.
Tending, that's one of the verbs on the list, Lauren.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh. So you got your degree, you went through the journey, and you've given me a list of verbs, and I thought maybe this is a good time to actually go to them, because I think they speak, well, as I'm reading them, I am imagining they speak very much to the practice that you've learned and that you teach people when you work with them. And so do you mind if I go ahead and read the verbs, and then we can take it from there?
Sure.
So the
Yeah.
list that Lauren gave me: embody, accept, settle, attune, pause, breathe, expand, and let go.
Mm.
It's a great list.
Yeah, I think a lot of those are related, and I think weave into the first one, which is embody. And it also weaves into like the healing and the trauma work and the nervous system work. So a lot of what I do starts with a settling of the nervous system. When I think of settling, I think of like when you're like getting comfortable on a couch.
Yes, you're actually doing it right now, right? There's a
Yeah,
certain amount
you're
of
like where like you're or another image I love is like, you know, if you like shake up a jar of like glitter, and
yeah,
then it all, or like a snow globe, right? And then it
yeah, yeah,
all kind of slowly, and it takes time, right? It's not a
yeah.
fast process. It's kind of a slow um filtering, and the energy level kind of comes down,
And so you're
and then
feeling
you're in
that.
this more restful state.
Oh gosh, that is such a good way to look at it, because I don't know, when I was finishing up my undergrad degree, I was I was going out to rivers and collecting soil to look at the particle size distribution in the different size creeks. And that is what you do in the laboratory, right? You shake the water, everything is spinning and it's suspended, and then you let it be still, and you're looking at the amount of time it takes for the sand to drop out, for the silt, which is a little bit bigger than sand, and then the clay, which is the smallest. And so using these analogies for our brains that are constantly spinning, right? Constantly spinning, can't slow down, can't focus on anything, just that just sense of everything is in motion. Wait, stop. And then things just start to drop out, and there's heavier things that drop faster than the lighter things. And so using those analogies can really help someone who maybe has never actually settled before, because I don't know if I had ever settled before the age of 40. So
Yeah.
helping someone with those analogies to bring their energy to a quieter place. And so then you've settled, and what comes next? Attune, accept, pause, breathe.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an order. Because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't
Yeah.
put them in like a particular order, but the pausing feels important to settle, right? Like that you have to pause first to allow things to settle and sink in. Um, the speed feels relevant here, and not that a fast pace is always bad, but we do tend to kind of like quick blip through things, and it's harder to feel our bodies when we do that. And so to pause and to settle and even to relax a little bit, tension tends to block body sensation. And so when we do that, we're opening to a more awareness of sensation, emotion, experience. Um,
And then do you
and
actually
when we're
get people to
attuned,
move? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you get people to move? Like if someone comes in, you think of like you come in, you sit down on the couch, your therapist is in the armchair looking at you. Maybe you lie down on the couch, but it must be different with you. Do you get people moving? Is there a floor that they
I do,
Yeah.
yeah. And it really depends on the person. It's also individualized, but and this kind of leads into the word attune, actually, right? Which is meeting people where they're at, and also within an individual, meeting your body and your nervous system where it's at, and
Yeah, for
being
sure.
right, like
Yeah.
not trying to be like, oh, we're up here, we need to be down here, and you're like trying to like force it along, right? It's like, no,
Yeah.
let's actually
Yeah.
match whatever's happening, which also feels like an acceptance process of let's
Yes.
be really honest and honoring and attuning to what is real and true in the moment, and being with that and accepting with that, and seeing from there what needs to happen, what direction needs to come out of that. So when I'm working with people, it really depends on the person. For some people, the settling is really important, and they come in and we take some time to ground and to breathe and to pause, and then see where we're at, right? And go from there. Um, for some people, the work is really around that like almost like regulating piece, right? For other folks, it's starting to track internally, like what are the sensations and emotions that are coming up? Where do they feel that? Can we describe that and slow down and tune in to those a little bit more?
So
And
if
then there
so if
is the
someone is
movement.
feeling, sorry to interrupt you, but if someone is feeling
Yeah,
sorrow, that sorrow might actually reside in a specific area of the body. Or if someone is feeling anger or fear, that might show up in different actual physical locations in the body. And
absolutely. Yeah. So starting to really listen to those as, like, I call it like raw data, right? Which you might relate to as like a
oh yeah,
researcher, right? Like
yeah,
your body sensations are the raw data. Often we're, starting with like the story of what happened, but if we can kind of let go of that, come back to like, what is the feeling? Like, is it in your chest? Okay, if we locate it in the chest as an example, and then we start to describe it, like what's the feeling, what's the texture, is there a color, is there an image that goes with it, like what's really happening there? And then maybe also linking in, is there like an emotion that feeling is connected to? And then we can start to get to how do we want to interpret that and work with that? So that's, again, going back to the word somatic, right? We're starting actually with the body sensation and identifying that, and really allowing that to be its full thing, whatever it needs to be. And then going from there. And then that's often when I will invite people into some kind of movement experience that matches or expresses whatever that feeling is. And there's a lot of different ways that can go, of course, depending on what is happening and also the person's comfort level with movement. And, you know, people land in different places around that too. So that also is going to either be more structured or more open depending on the person and how they're entering into that kind of work.
And so there's a noun that just is begging to be spoken here, and that's gentleness. It's not a verb.
Yeah.
It's a noun. That somehow the acceptance and the attunement are very much related to the gentleness. So if you're attuning to where somebody is, and so your own body of, like, literally, quite literally, body of experience, body of knowledge in yourself and your own life, and being attuned to yourself allows you to be perceptive, to perceive the person that you're working with, and to perceive where the doorway to adjustment is, and whether that's a large doorway or a very, very small doorway, and to allow and accept that it's not about forcing everyone to have the big realizations or to talk about the really difficult things. It's about understanding what that healing pathway is, what that spiral is for someone. And so I see that you're weaving and integrating these different experiences into your attunement and paying attention. And paying attention, the word attention has the same ancient word in it that the word tend does.
Yeah, that feels very relevant to the whole process, to attune, to give attention, to tend, to be gentle, to pause, to move slowly, right? All of these things I think really go together, and there's a softening and an opening that happens with that, right? Again, if we go back to, like, tension tends to block sensation in the body, right? And we spend a lot of time resisting experiences. Like, I don't want to feel that emotion, or that experience it was too much, it's overwhelming, or I need to guard or protect myself in some way, and so I'm holding on to things. And
that goes
there's
for
a
the
lot
good
of
and the
wisdom
bad, right?
in that.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to pause for a moment and recognize that shying away from or holding back from goes for pleasurable experiences and emotions, and also difficult. So it's we tend to not want to experience the breadth, the good or the bad.
I think there's a great, I think it was Brene Brown quote. She said, "You can't selectively numb." And so if you think of the spectrum of, like, awesome, pleasurable, wonderful experience all the way to, like, super traumatizing, awful experiences, and a lot of numbing or dissociating, or like, ooh, I don't want that, I don't want to feel that, comes on that more difficult spectrum of, like, challenging emotions or traumatic experiences, or, you know, whatever it is on that end that you're like, oh, but cutting that off actually cuts off the other end as well, where what you're limiting what you can feel in general, not just the bad stuff, right? You end up kind of limiting everything. And so as you're feeling into the stuff that's really difficult, you're also expanding your capacity for the really beautiful things that you can feel in life. And amazing. Vice versa, as you're feeling more and more of the beautiful things that you have the potential to feel and experience, you're also opening your capacity to hold some of the more difficult stuff.
And so I'm going to just turn the camera on very briefly, but in this little room, there's the wall of peace verbs over here.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
This is where it started, and there's one
I see dance. It's
right. Dance is there.
It's right there.
So up in the corner is rise above polarities, and when I wrote that,
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was at that point in time holding trauma that was keeping me from grounding. And so my sensation of how to deal with polarities was to rise above them. And yet that in itself is suggesting a polarity of above versus below, right? There's still a polarity in that. And somehow this description of allowing that you're talking about, allowing for the polarities, and it's like, to me, it feels very much like the spiral, or even like, how a tree grows and you've got baby tree has just a few rings, but teenager tree has a few more rings, and like,
Yeah.
grandma tree has a lot of rings, or grandpa tree, and somehow the container that we are expands in all directions, and that allows the intensity of the good or the bad to be held, and something about being able to absorb that. And how, going back to the water analogy, how if you put water into a creek system, there's an amount of water, like the timing of that water coming through the creek system, that the creek can accommodate and still hold its banks
Mm-hmm.
together and still be a creek. And
Yeah.
too little and you've got a drought, too much and you've got a incised banks and everything's collapsing. And so there's an inherent amount of flow that our human beingness can move and absorb with harmony, with
Mm-hmm.
integration. And so something about meeting people where they are and recognizing some people may already be that teenager tree, and you can move more through them, or they can move more through themselves, and
Totally. Yeah.
others are not, and to be accepting of that. And so you're coming into a session and a relationship, working with someone and saying, I accept you, is then allowing that person the concept of accepting themselves. And that's not culturally, in our Western culture that you and I have grown up in and are surrounded by mostly, uh, that acceptance isn't really a common container.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comparison. There's a lot of shouldn't I be like this or shouldn't I be like that, and a lot of outward attention. And so for you to say, in a very embodied way, in a way that they don't just hear you saying it, but they also feel you saying it with your own stillness, with your own body language and eye contact and presence. They hear you saying, I accept you. And so then there's that little bit of expansion that happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something called the paradox of change, which is the idea that you have to fully, radically accept something exactly as it is in order for it to change or shift or develop.
Oh, wow.
And when you think about that, you can see, sometimes when like we want to change or we want to improve or we want to heal, and that can be really positive, but there can also be this sort of subtle self-aggression that's embedded in that, of like, I'm not okay how I am, or I'm
Mm.
not good how I am,
Mm-hmm.
or like I need to like fix something, right? And then that, but then now we're talking about, again, there's some tension, there's resistance, right? There's something kind of crunchy happening there that actually becomes a bit of a block, compared to when we can really accept, allow, attune, breathe, pause, embody. Now I'm going through all the words,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
um, there's something that opens then, where we then the path forward becomes quite natural and available to us. And that has just, I think, a really different quality to it.
And yet there's also something about, and this gets back to what you were saying, accepting the fact that no one of us is always flowing. Like, yes, I am always in the flow. No.
Yeah. Definitely not always in the flow.
Right. No. I accept my trauma with ease. No. Or I accept my joy with ease. And there's something about the constant seeking that I believe we all have, that sensation of, and who knows, we could put a label on it. Maybe we would call that the ego that always wants us to move. Or maybe it's just actually some kind of aspect of being alive and life force energy that wants to move. And yet there's also that encountering of periodic stumbling blocks or confusions, or, mountains that we don't feel like we can climb. And that is actually to be accepted and part of the process of being alive. And so it's not, so I'm going to bring back to that concept of polarities, not really about rising above the polarities, but about noticing the polarities, allowing the polarities, experiencing the polarities, moving with the polarities, or not moving with the polarities. The dance of that.
There's something maybe about like a spiral or an infinity sign.
Yeah, you're doing that, right?
Those, right?
And there's that
like,
wave.
There's this like inner outer flow. There's kind of ups and downs, and resistance and change, and acceptance and blocks, and that being in that kind of interaction between polarities, and then actually there ends up being a lot of middle ground there too when you're doing that.
And still points, and you and I, we learned at one point in our circus training how to, oh gosh, I forget what they were called, beats or something, but you're swinging on the rope and your body goes up, and then it's still, and then your body comes back down.
Oh my gosh, I remember those.
And then it's still, and then you're just like, and so in that process that you do have these inflection points of stillness. So there's movement and there's struggle, and or maybe there's the roller coaster rush where there's no struggle and it's very easy, but then wait. And so to recognize and allow that, and to accept that there is a rhythm to life, and also to practice different ways of embodying that, like dance has rhythm and movement and motion and stillness and preparation and execution. And I don't know, I don't have words for it. I'm trying to
I love that you brought in that move. I think you're right. I think it was called beats or something like that. Oh my gosh, so hard. And for folks who maybe don't know what we're talking about, when there's a particular move on an aerial rope where you're,
first of all, you're just holding, you're holding onto your entire body weight with your upper body. You're holding on with your hands. That's the first thing to understand about this.
And then you're creating like a pendulum essentially, so that you're swinging.
Yes.
In this pendulum motion from one kind of upside down side to the other. It's super hard. Oh my gosh, it's so difficult. But I love that actually, because there's something about the balance there where it's super, super hard, and there's a lot of effort happening, and there's a lot of muscle happening, but there's also parts that need to be relaxed. There's also a letting go that has to happen at a certain
not with your
point.
Hands. Not with your not letting
right
go
like
hands.
there's certain parts that have to be really engaged at the right time. There's like a precision to it, and then there's other parts of your body and also other points in the movement where you have to really let go and let gravity really do its thing.
Trust.
But it's like you have to have the alignment for the gravity to be able to do its thing, but you also can't be efforting in the part that's supposed to be flowing, but then you need to effort in the part where you need the effort. It's actually a beautiful example of like this process of like this swinging,
the human pendulum,
between the two, but like there is so dynamic what's happening there, and this like effort and flow that has to go together in the exact right way.
And then to bring it all back down to it's not on the list, I think, for you, but it's on the list for everybody. Let go of being perfect and right. and play. And play and really just experience and practice. So in doing the beats, none of us got it right the first time. There was a lot of practice and training and okay, let's try again. Let's try again.
I remember being told to do 10,000 of them.
Oh.
It's
Yeah,
like,
maybe.
you'll get it after you do 10,000. I was like, okay.
Yeah, and how many hours of one's life does one have to spend hanging on a rope in a gym to get to 10,000? But yeah, but
Yeah.
to allow it to be okay to, to not get it right, and allow it to be okay to try and then to try again, and then, and to allow oneself to be ridiculous in the process. I think that was one of my biggest lessons taken from not just that particular aspect of circus, but circus in general, was to allow
Yeah.
myself to be ridiculous in the trying,
Yeah.
and upside down, to allow oneself to be upside down. There's
Yeah.
something about that experience of not requiring oneself to always have your feet on the ground is
Mm.
helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels like there's a piece of acceptance in that too, of like, this is the experience, this is what's happening. And then how do I show up in that when I'm upside down, or when I'm being ridiculous, or when I'm doing something that's really hard and I don't know what I'm doing, right? There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of that same process of like be attuning to that moment and being in your body so you can experience it and be in that learning process, and hopefully have some like pleasure and enjoyment along the way, right?
So let's see. So yeah, I wanted to bring it to the part of your practice that helps people explore their sexuality, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, we have different rules that we place on ourselves, and it could be about the career path that we think we're supposed to take, or being perfect in all ways. And something about the experience that I went through at age 40 of being in the circus gym and watching my muscles get to the point where, for the first time in my life, I felt like the most alive I'd ever felt in my body, the most alive. And yet, if you looked at me, I didn't look feminine anymore, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't fit into the dresses. I actually ripped clothing by accident. Like I didn't look
That's
feminine
awesome.
anymore. Right, right. So I felt the most in my body. I felt the most alive and joyful that I'd ever experienced before. And so, to think about that going against the grain of what was considered feminine or acceptable for me as a woman in our culture, it really, it's skirting, it's in the general neighborhood of the allowing oneself to be fully embodied sexually as is defined
Totally.
internally. And so
Yes.
here you are, another pioneer. And I'm sure that we could say, like we were talking about, uh, that somatic therapy is not new, that it's indigenously experienced over time and space across the globe. I'm sure that we could talk about sexuality in a similar way. But can you tell me a little bit more about why you felt this was important to hold this container, and what kind of container you're holding for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sexuality piece has been just so important in my own process too, because that was a big piece that opened up for me when I started doing this kind of work in a deeper way, and um, feeling my body in a more honest and authentic way,
Hmm.
and accepting what I felt in a more honest and authentic way, and really allowing that. That's a lot of what came up for me, was first of all really getting in touch with my masculine side and the parts of me that really did not feel feminine at all, and parts that I didn't realize I had quite a lot of internal judgment about.
There's an awakening that's happening. There's a assessment that's happening, and there's a self-honoring that's happening, and there's an acceptance that's happening, uh, and a movement towards. So I believe you are in saying, you did have a positive experience. It was terrifying, and yet you were met with love, and your partner had a container, was able to be a container large enough to hold you, and to move with you, to grow with you. That is a beacon of hope. You're holding a beacon of hope, because you can show people it's possible. And so if their current container doesn't allow for that, you're still showing them there's a possibility of that. And so there's a light that you're lighting, I believe, that the two of you are
Yeah.
lighting in that sense. And
Yeah.
it so you're pioneering, you're holding space, you're you're validating, and you're voicing. So there's a lot of voices that we have. So there was the voice that came to me through I don't know how many decades of fashion magazines of
Ooh,
you're too strong, you have too much bulk, you're too much muscle. And then the inner voice of me, which was, but I'm too happy. Like,
yeah.
you know what? You win. Happiness wins. And so
Yeah.
you're you're providing this voice of joy and gentleness and acceptance that is now in the chorus amongst all the other voices that people are hearing around them when they're having these awakenings inside of them. And so thank you for that, Lauren. I just want to express gratitude for you being
Oh,
that voice of love.
thank you.
Yeah. And so
Yeah,
is there
well, and I mean,
anything
I think that's one of the really core and beautiful things that happens in therapy is, getting to have that like healing in relationship experience, right? To have that awakening in yourself,
yeah.
and then to have someone who can be with you in that, is so vital. And that's one of the things that I love about the therapeutic relationship is getting to be with people in that process and provide that container of acceptance and nurturing and validation and allowance and all of these things, right? That feels really powerful to be able to have that in relationship and have that support the internal process of developing those things for yourself as well.
The being in relationship part, we can't get away from it, which is what you mentioned when you were in the career shift of I'm a teacher, why I love people. I'm a therapist, why I love people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as we're getting close to drawing this conversation and to its conclusion, I also wanted to ask you about energetic boundaries because it's just a fascination of mine as anybody who's in a support role, either as a body worker, massage therapist, or yourself as a somatic therapist. You talk to a lot of people through the course of a day, and how do you close that session and then let their energy go back to them and let your energy come back to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, so important. And that's something I've been in kind of constant process around, and I shift and refine it over time, and I'm
And like,
still
look, I think you're
learning and
doing it
I'm
with your
still
body, right?
figuring it out. Yeah,
You're
it's
weaving.
another
You're
one of those like infinity spiral processes, but I think one of the things that has felt really important for me is to just be really really clear about what's mine and what's not, and what my role is and what it's not, and what I can do for people and what I can't. And I mean like literally like sitting down and like writing lists of
for
like these are things that I
yourself.
do and these
Yeah,
are things that I don't do. Yeah, just for myself,
yeah.
just internally, to be really really clear about that, because it does get muddy and you get pulled into people and you get invested, and there, yeah, energetically there's a lot of exchange happening. And so being able to come back and kind of ground into like a really clear framework and almost like conceptual understanding of what I'm doing and what I'm not doing,
So you're so
has been
you're
really important to me.
you're thinking with your heart and you're thinking with your mind. Like on the list of verbs that I thought of, I had learn with the heart and learn with the mind, but there's also think with the heart and think with the mind. So
Mm-hmm.
you're giving your mind a role to play here, which is help me with a list. And your
Yeah,
heart, I'm sure,
yeah. There's
is evaluating the list, but the mind is given the job of this is what I do, this is what I don't do, so that you have your own
yeah.
sense before you even go in. So I was asking about how do you close a session, but you're even talking about how do I open a session.
And yeah,
And
that's even like behind the scenes
yeah.
on a different day, like
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And but yeah, I think there is a support of an intellectual process there, right? That I think can be a really nice, again, balance. Um and and then in terms of my sessions, again, coming back to myself and my body, right? Especially after a session, taking that pause to really notice, okay, how am I? What am I
Mm.
feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to my own breath,
Mm-hmm.
coming back to some of my own kind of larger spiritual beliefs that kind of help me ground,
Mm-hmm.
having kind of some little rituals in between sessions that help me just take my focus from that other person back onto me and my body,
Right.
and that sense of like, okay, this is my sort of physical boundary, energetic boundary, this is me, right, feeling myself again, and then starting to kind of, okay, orient towards the next person that I might have in the next session, right? But I think coming back to my own embodiment in between is really, really key, so that I'm not just out.
Mm.
I'm going out, and I'm also coming back in, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm also doing that in session where
Mm-hmm.
I'm meeting people and I'm with people, and I'm also checking in with myself, and I'm also grounding myself while I'm with people, but then also, in between and before and after, as bookends as well.
That's great. That's great. I'm an intuitive channel, and so I meet with people and have sessions where I bring through information for them. And my tool is I have a little piece of broken glass, and it came to me. My friend, my friend who is also a healer, sent me a Ganesha, and so you've been in Thailand, you know Lord Ganesha, one of the Southeast Asian gods. And Ganesha was sitting on a crystal bowl, and a piece of the crystal bowl broke off in the transport, and my friend was very upset that she had sent me something that had gotten broken. But I knew it was actually a gift from Lord Ganesha. It's like this perfect like lightsaber scepter, kind of like cuts the energy, cuts the cords, and it, like sends it back to the other person with love. And then it so I think we all have to have our tools, and I ask
Yeah.
that for your sake, but also for the people who are listening, as a peace verb, the holding of the boundaries and having ceremony and having actual things that you do in between sessions that help
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and I would really encourage folks that are interested in that to, like you did, like make something that's your own.
Yeah.
It can be tempting to maybe turn to particular cleansing practices that you've learned or something like that. I actually recommend making it really, really personal, like something that you come up with that has some sort of quality or feeling, or like I incorporate a little bit of water, like I like the kind of
Mm.
cleansing feeling of water
Mm-hmm.
for me, so that's something that I use, and smells, I have like some smelly things that I use as
Mm-hmm.
well, that are
Mm-hmm.
specific, and um but like I really took some time to feel into like what made sense to me for
Right.
those transitions, and that's what I would really encourage people to do, is to really, let go of maybe more uh, traditional things, or things that have, are
What everyone else
structured or
says they're
something.
supposed to
And
be like.
yeah, like
Yeah.
don't, let go of all the advice, like
Yeah.
find something that really resonates with you, because that's what's going to actually land in
Right.
your system more
Right.
fully. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Well, Lauren, thank you so much. It's just a dream come true to host you in this interview, and appreciate your time and all of the beauty that you've shared, and being real about it as well. I think that helps people a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. I first of all have really enjoyed this. This has been such a fun conversation, and I really appreciate you putting this together. And I just felt so excited about the topic that you've been working with. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much just for all your sweet reflections and everything today, too. It's been just such a lovely conversation.
Thanks, Lauren.